Hello everyone, welcome to Classroom 2.0 Live for Saturday, June 11th. Today's topic is Discover, Create, and Share with Smithsonian Digital Resources. Your show hosts are Peggy George, I'm Lori Moffett, Tammy Moore, thanks to Tammy for doing the closed captioning for us, and Paula Noggle. Our special guests are Ashley, Naranjo, and Darren Milligan. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Peggy, who will introduce Ashley and Darren for us.
Well, hello everyone. I know it's not morning for all of you. It is morning in Phoenix, about 9 a.m. But for some of you, I know it's way into the evening, and we're so glad you're all here. We are really excited to have the opportunity to learn about some fabulous new resources and learning opportunities from the Smithsonian Learning Lab. And we have two special guests here to share with us. Both of them are from the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. Darren Milligan is the Senior Digital Strategist, and Ashley Naranjo is the Learning Initiative Specialist. Darren has a job description that I think we could all fall in love with. He researches and develops services for making online museum resources accessible and useful to educators and learners, including producing experiences such as online games and interactives, managing pan-institutional communication, directing web platforms, including the online portal for educational resources at the institution, and the Smithsonian Learning Lab, which are actually two separate places. He was formerly the producer and art director of the teacher magazine, Smithsonian in Your Classroom. So some of you may have seen that. It was distributed to every primary and secondary school in the United States. And prior to the Smithsonian, he developed citizen science programs and online mentoring communities at the Purple Martin Conservation Association. Doesn't that just sound like an awesome job? I am so in awe. And Ashley has also had some great experiences, and she develops and implements online interactive learning experiences for both educators and students in the Smithsonian Learning Lab. Before coming to the Smithsonian, she worked in education in both formal and informal learning spaces. She was an ESOL instructor, a middle school substitute teacher, and a summer programs assistant director for Congressional Schools of Virginia. And right now, she's pursuing her master's in education in learning design and technology. So welcome to both of you. And to get things started, I'm going to move on to our newbie question and ask Ashley to jump right on the mic and answer the newbie question and begin their presentation. And here's the newbie question. So why is it important for teachers and students to have access to digital museum resources for learning?
Thanks so much, Peggy, for having Darren and I here. We're so excited to share the Smithsonian Learning Lab with you all. But to answer your newbie question in true educator fashion, I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm actually going to demonstrate the answer to you all. So on the next slide, we have 6 objects from across the Smithsonian, and I'm actually going to ask everybody to participate. And so these are 6 tools of innovation, and I'll give you a little bit of information about each one, but I'd like you to think about which of these objects is most innovative and which one is least innovative. So thinking about kind of a spectrum from most innovative to least innovative. And so we'll start here. I'll give you a little bit of information. The first one is a Clovis point. And this is from kind of pre-Columbian America, 13,000 years ago. And the main kind of functionality of the Clovis point was to improve hunting efficiency for large mammals. It could be added and detached from a spear to start kind of carving carcasses and things like that. So this first object is the Clovis point, again 13,000 years old. The next object I've included is the Lewis and Clark Expedition Pocket Compass. So probably one of the most famous compasses in history, right? And in 1804, it was used to assist the Lewis and Clark to search for the Northwest Passage and to make official diplomatic contact with Indian leaders. And so we've got the Clovis point. We're moving on to the Lewis and Clark compass. The next object that we have, moon gloves. And so as everyone knows, spacesuit gloves have to protect astronauts' hands, but they also have to recreate the idea of tactile sensation, right? So being able to actually feel what you're touching. And so these are actually pretty cool. They include shark skin grip pads on the thumbs and the first two fingers. And they allow for kind of that grip sensation when a crew member is up in space. So we've got the Clovis point, we've got the Lewis and Clark Expedition Compass, moon gloves, and then this one might be familiar to most people, and actually maybe some of you are using this innovative tool. And this is the MacBook Air laptop, and it's especially known for its kind of thin and light form, as well as the portability. And there wasn't actually, this was kind of a newer innovation where there wasn't a drive for reading CDs or DVDs, but it was more about downloading and wirelessly connecting. And so again, we've got 4 objects that we've gotten through so far, and I want you to be thinking about what is the most innovative and what is the least innovative and start to put them on a spectrum. This one is the fireside chat microphone from 1933, and this was when FDR used this microphone specifically to communicate through a new medium of radio. And so he used this to start to shape public opinion, talk to the people of the U.S. about the banking crisis. And so we've got kind of these 5 objects so far. And last but certainly not least, this is a quipu, and it's associated with the Incan tribes, and it consists of a main cord with a number of attached strings with knots. And this was used for census information, things to collect taxes from local communities, and also used as memory aids by historians as well as genealogists. So it's kind of tough competition here. If you look back, we've got our 6 objects. Again, I'll just go through them left to right. The Clovis point, the compass, the moon gloves, the laptop, the fireside chat microphone, and the quipu. So these are 6 objects that are in the Smithsonian's collection. And so I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. I noticed one of the participants mentioned that they are all innovative according to their period. But if you had to choose, what do you think would be the most innovative? And this is actually really modeling an activity that we've done with several different groups to be able to think about the idea of innovation, but using really just visual imagery to help students start to come up with their own evidence and justification for their answers. So if you'd like, you can use the chat box where Peggy says, do you have your answer ready? And I'll also start to point out some of the things that Darren and I both thought, because we actually have very differing opinions, and I think this is a great example. But it looks like some people are voting for the compass, the Clovis point, because people need to have food, they need to eat. I go for number 1. Again, the compass in an earlier era, exactly. The microphone, the computer, interesting. So it looks like we're getting a lot of different answers. The computer again. The poor moon gloves and the quipu. Not getting too many votes there. Creating tools separates man from animals. Good, I like the justification there too. Well, let's take a peek at how Darren and I both answered this question. So again, from least innovative to most innovative, and this was the way that I thought about it. And I agreed with you too, that the Clovis point was really quite innovative and really kind of defining humanity. And so that was my most innovative object that I chose. It's funny because when I think about innovation, I probably, without any of these objects or resources, I might have thought of the MacBook Air right away. But then seeing some of these different objects for different purposes, I really had to hone in on what is the definition of innovation and start to think about both kind of the idea of like the human impact, the broad appeal, something that was new and transformative. So this is how I answered the question, but Darren might actually jump in and share how he answered the question as well.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you as well. Yeah, so I had slightly different approach. Actually, it was funny when Ashley and I were putting this together. I put the computer as the laptop there as the most innovative. And you know, if you speak to the curators at the National Museum of American History, where this object lives, you know, this was collected for the reasons that Ashley explained, that it's an innovation in terms of sort of solid state hard drives and sort of an evolution of that, and not necessarily a profound innovative step forward. But to me, you know, the laptop symbolizes kind of the internet and global communication in the period that we're in now, that you know, seems most relevant to me and most important in terms of how it's impacting and sort of changing the world. And so, you know, I think this is an activity that, you know, we've done with a lot of groups, and it's always very interesting to look at the ways that people think about innovation and how they think about these objects, probably in a slightly different way than you might think about how museum objects might be used in the museum, you know, where you might be learning about that laptop itself and the company that made it, or the people that may have made the Clovis point, or how the Space Club would have been used in space. And this is sort of a different way of thinking about how these objects, when used together, create some opportunities for some different dialogues with students.
Great. And I also wanted to mention that actually all of these objects are from, there's some objects that are from the National Museum of American History, some that are from the Air and Space Museum, the National Museum of American Indian, the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, as well as the Natural History Museum. So later in this webinar, I'll actually show you some other ways that museum educators like myself, teachers, and even students have used digitized museum objects to enhance student learning. And Peggy also just included in the chat box a link to the larger Learning Lab collection. These are just 6 items from a much larger collection, and in addition to some of the questions that we ask and ways that you could implement this with your students. With that, I'll turn it over to Darren to give us an overview of the Smithsonian Learning Lab.
Thank you, Ashley. So we thought it might be helpful just to give you a kind of a whirlwind introduction to the Smithsonian, to the place where Ashley and I are lucky enough to come to work every day. And perhaps you, I know some of the people there have said they bring their students. Perhaps many of you have trekked to Washington, have seen the Smithsonian, have come to some of the museums. But you know, if you haven't, perhaps you know, often people think of this kind of as the Smithsonian. This is from 2009, from the film night at the museum. This is sort of funny. A lot of times, this is sort of what people with little children in their life think about as the Smithsonian. So grandparents and parents often sort of have this image, but this is more of what we think about the Smithsonian. This is where the Smithsonian started. This is the 1849 Smithsonian Castle building, which if you've been on the National Mall, you've definitely seen that. This is sort of where the Smithsonian began. Everything was here at once. The scientists lived in this building. It was kind of one place. This is more of what we think of now. This is the National Mall. This shows 8 of our museums. Most of our museums are in Washington. But 2 of them were actually in New York, the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, and one of the 2 branches of the National Museum of the American Indian are up in Manhattan. We're building a museum right now. It's opening in September. This is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which will open in mid-September. It'll be our 19th museum. But the Smithsonian is often thought of for its collections. Iconic objects. We've got the Hope Diamond here on the left, a 45-carat blue diamond, and this object on the right, which I'm wondering if people recognize. Any guesses in the chat? Anyone know what that shirt is on the right? Oh, no guesses. All right. Pop culture. Yes, there we go. Good job, Brendan. Yeah, so this is the puffy shirt from a 1993 episode of Seinfeld. Also, known for art objects that have really become sort of icons of American history. The Lansdowne portrait of George Washington on the left, a more recent presidential portrait. Also, contemporary art objects. This is an amazing piece if you've ever been to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. It's about 20 feet tall. These screens are showing different programs. It's a work by Namjoon Park called Electronic Superhighway. Also, objects that document the complex history of the United States. This is a piece on the left, which is a winter count, recorded events between about 1800 and 1870 from the Lakota people. On the right is the lunch counter from the Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then, also objects that are associated with sort of the growth of America's 20th century technological achievements. The Wright Flyer on the left, the original 1903 Wright Flyer there, and then all the way up to space travel, to the Space Shuttle Discovery here, which is used for 27 years. One of only 5 space shuttles that were built. This is the one we've got in our Air and Space Museum out by Dulles Airport in Virginia. Had more space flights than any of the other space shuttles. But most of our collections are scientific specimens. About 90% of our collections look like this. On the left are entomological collections. On the right, botany, algal collections. We've got what we call wet collections. So on the left, those jars are filled with fish. And on the right, those containers are actually filled with DNA specimens. This is a project called the Global Genome Initiative, which is an initiative to preserve biological specimens from about 5 million species. And we also have what we call living collections. We have the National Zoo as part of the Smithsonian. We also have a place called the Conservation Biology Institute, which is a place where animals are kept for captive breeding endangered species. So we've got a cheetah there on the left, and of course the giant panda. So the Smithsonian, is a big place. As I mentioned, we've got 19 museums, galleries, the National Zoo. More than 138 million objects and specimens are housed within the museums and research centers. Lots of library volumes, lots of archival material. So we're not just a museum, we're research centers, we're libraries, we're archives, we're the zoo, and we're a lot of people. More than 6,000 people work here. Lots of fellows, lots of volunteers. About half of those volunteers are actually digital volunteers who help us with scientific transcription and other works online. So, as you may think of the Smithsonian as really one place, it's really a lot more like this. A whole network of museums and research centers and other programmatic offices that are focused specifically on serving a specific audience or focusing on a specific area of research. And Ashley and I are from that place, that little one there. We're from an office called the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. And we focus specifically on teachers and learners and those wanting to use the resources of the Smithsonian to have learning experiences, but outside of our buildings. For all of you who are out there in the world who are accessing our resources online and making use of them for a learning experience. And historically we did a lot of teacher professional development, which we still do now. So we would bring teachers to Washington there. We've got some teachers on the left interacting with one of our forensic anthropologists. And as Peggy mentioned at the beginning, we published a teacher magazine called Smithsonian in the Classroom, and for a number of years. And there's a whole network of educators at the Smithsonian outside of our office that are developing digitally accessible educational resources. To your question, everything that we make available online is free. So there's a huge variety of educational resources that take a lot of different formats. And so there's things like Smithsonian in your Classroom, which are lesson plans, teacher magazines, online interactives, things that were developed for students for them to engage with our content in digital spaces. There's a lot of real-world research databases and information that we make available that has a great application in the classroom. And then, a lot of things like this, a lot of archived webinars or live webinars where students, teachers, everyone can interact directly with scientists and curators and other experts here at the Smithsonian. But we also have a lot of this, a lot of digital content. Videos, illustrations, photographs, digitized collections, archival material, all of this content that has been made available due to digitization. So we're in the process of digitizing those collections. I mentioned we have almost 140 million objects. We're not going to, at least in the short term, not going to digitize everything, but we have sort of made a first pass at what we'd like to prioritize, and that involves about 12 million objects that we're working on digitizing right now. Some in 3D, some in 2D, and all made available and accessible by everyone. And the reason that Ashley and I are here today is first just to tell you all this stuff's out there and available to you. But we've been working over the last few years on trying to understand how these resources can be made more useful, especially to teachers and their students. And that resulted in a project that Ashley and I are really excited about. We're in the process of launching it right now. And if you're at home and you want to open up a browser window, you can go to learninglab.si.edu and sort of check it out. It's completely accessible. But we're going to take you through a little sort of whirlwind tour of what the site looks like and what's available. It's a single point of access for all those resources I mentioned, but we hope a whole lot more. So we're going to take you on a little walk through that. The first big part of what the Learning Lab is about discovery. So we have those thousands of educational resources and lesson plans and interactives. We have millions of collection objects. We've got videos. We have all this other material that used to be available in lots of different places. And so, like I said, we had 19 museums and research centers. And if you I used to kind of make the joke, if you understood the National Mall and where our buildings were and what was in each building, you could probably find our things online. They were split up along all the different museum websites. They weren't really pulled together in a way that made it easy and useful for everyone to find it. And so the first thing is really about discovery. But the second thing about the Learning Lab is, all of those resources we really think of as the building blocks for something new. And so the Learning Lab has a series of tools that enable us here at the Smithsonian, but enable you out there, anyone, to use those materials as the building blocks to create new learning opportunities. And we'll take a look at what that sort of looks like. And finally, the Learning Lab is about sharing. So it's a community of people who are using the resources, who are building new things out of them, and then are sharing what they've done with others. It enables everyone to build upon the work of others. And we'll see what that looks like. We're going to sort of kind of walk through each of these sections here quickly just to give you a hint of what that looks like if you're actually in the sort of discover, create, or share place. So we're going to start with discovery. So our content is very visual. Most of our resources are images, and so the interface of the Learning Lab is a very visual interface. You could search for almost anything and find visual search results. And once you've found something that you're interested in, you can click into it and you can explore it. So the resources are made available in as high resolution as possible. And as many of our objects are three-dimensional, like this fly here, they're presented in multiple views, so you can zoom in and out. You can check out different images of them that have been taken. You can favorite them. You can sort of see that little heart over on the side. You can favorite things and save them to later, and then you can begin to build upon them. So what you'll find there today, what's discoverable there today, and so I mentioned, we have 138 million objects. We've got about 1.3 million of those digitized. That includes a lot of images. Most of our things are things, and so there's pictures of them. But there's also a lot of text-based resources, more than 10,000 video and audio files, more than 2,000 lesson plans and websites, all accessible there for you to discover. Now, as we move into the kind of create idea, we call that on the lab a collection. So the resources are all the raw material, and as you begin to pull them together, they become collections. And so, the site's been up for a few months, kind of in a quiet sort of beta stage, is what we sort of call it. And we're in the process of making it more letting more people know about it, I guess. And so, so in this quiet stage, there's about 3,000 collections have been made. By people at the Smithsonian, by Ashley, by me, by people just out there in the world, teachers out there using that. And more than 500 of them have been published. And we're going to look at sort of what that means by published. Trying to sort of pay attention here a little bit to the chat too. There are many YouTube channels for videos at the Smithsonian. Each of the museums have individual YouTube channels. What you'll find in the Learning Lab are all of the videos from all those channels. And so, videos from the Air and Space Museum, videos from the National Zoo, videos from our research centers in Panama and on the Chesapeake Bay, all of that material is pulled together into one place. And then, the idea is once you've found something that you're interested in, what can you do with it? How can you turn it into something new? And that's what we call in the lab a collection. And I'm going to bring Ashley back into the chat here. And this is a collection that Ashley made. And she'll kind of talk you through how she made it and
sure, thanks, Darren. This is a collection that I actually just made this past week, and I paired, if you're familiar with them, the Harvard Project Zero Global Thinking Routines. So those are just some simple questions to ask alongside images to get students talking with some of the objects from across the Smithsonian. So what you're seeing here on the screen is actually a collection that I've pulled together with images and resources from the National Portrait Gallery, as well as the American History Museum, archival photographs, as well as the American Art Museum. You'll see that on the left hand, or on the right hand side, excuse me, to artworks from William H. Johnson. There's also a video as well as some quiz questions. So I'll walk you through what this one example looks like and some of the tools that are available to you to be able to use. So here is it's artwork called Marian Anderson, #1. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a William H. Johnson painting, and it commemorates her 1939 concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And actually the kind of interesting backstory here is that in 1939, she was barred from singing at the DAR Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. because of her race. And so government leaders actually worked to hold an open-air concert for her, and over 75,000 people came to the first open-air concert at the Lincoln Memorial. And so this is a commemoration artwork that includes that moment in history. So what I've been able to do here is side by side, if you click on the eye in the kind of middle of the screen, you'll see this provides all of the attached metadata. So really what a curator might share, as well as, oh great, Brendan just also gave a suggestion for a picture book for elementary students. That's great. But sorry, going back to the artwork itself, so this gives all of the metadata as well as, sometimes there's curatorial suggestions about exactly what's going on in the photo, as well as some connections to the original resource that you're seeing. Then there's also tools now in the Learning Lab where you can start to annotate and lead your students through some close looking or some suggestions of how to analyze the images and resources that you have. And so here is an image hotspot, and so it comes in a few different ways. You could kind of pinpoint specific parts of the artwork, or you can do what I did here where I highlighted simply Marian Anderson's singing, and then I was able to overlay a video, an archival video recording of her actually singing. So it really brings the artwork to life, and I love how it's able to kind of parallel the artwork itself, so you can see the artwork as well as kind of the real thing, so to speak. So then I asked students to view and listen the video recording of Marian Anderson's concert performance. And then I also included some extra kind of annotations here on the left that weren't included in the curatorial description of this artwork. And so one of kind of the little notes that I read about actually in an NPR article, National Public Radio, was that she sang My Country 'Tis of Thee, which is a very patriotic song. It's also known as America for those of you who are familiar with it. But she actually, when she got to the third line, she changed it from "of thee I sing" to "thee we sing," and so that's it's kind of a simple little nuance to this, but I think it's really something that's quite interesting. And so then I asked students, now that they've heard the song, now that they've seen that this change happened in the lyrics, is that symbolic of kind of what was happening at the time and actually, the concert as a whole? And so I'm able to layer on quiz questions as well. So here is just one example of how I took the resource from the Smithsonian's collections, and then I was able to really kind of bring it to life with some hot spots as well as my own information alongside it, and then also have students answer questions. These could be discussion prompts if I just wanted to project it up on a whiteboard or a screen. But then they could also, if students have accounts, and again, accounts are free like Darren mentioned, they could actually join a roster and then answer the questions directly. So it could be something similar to like a flipped classroom where this is the type of homework that they're working on. They're watching the videos ahead of time and then discussing in class. So those are just three of the different tools that are available within kind of the creation space. I also wanted to mention, I mentioned that I read up a little bit more about the specific concert through National Public Radio, and they had a great resource that the Smithsonian just didn't have. And so while we have over 1.3 million resources, which is quite an impressive number, there's certainly other resources from vetted sources, authoritative sources, that complement our resources quite well. And so one of the features that I really like is that I'm able to include external URLs in my collection. So while the artwork was actually a Smithsonian resource, I was able to complement my students' understanding of those resources with an external URL. I can also, at the end of the collection, once I've helped kind of lay the foundations, I can also do an ending kind of longer quiz where students can start to think about some of these questions. And these are the questions I mentioned from the Harvard Project Zero global thinking routines. And so the idea is to unveil kind of the multiple dimensions and layers of a given event in history, to think about kind of its most central visible story, the human story, as well as kind of the implications for a global world. So this is just one example of how you're able to create. And then you can kind of see back on the collection. What's nice about this is then I can publish this. I can tag it according to what subject areas it might fit in, what age levels it's appropriate for. But then other people can also take my collection and say, I really just want to focus on the artwork, or I just want to really focus on the archival photographs, or even I've got this great handout that I've always used with my students that I want to adapt what Ashley's done and make it something that's more meaningful to my students. A lot of what our research has said is that teachers like yourselves love to adapt things based on the students that are in front of them, and that's not a surprise, of course, but you can also include things like local examples, change the reading levels so that it's more appropriate for your students, and think about cultural connections that might make sense for the students that are in front of you in your classroom. Darren, do you want to continue on with kind of leading us through share?
Sure, thanks Ashley. Yeah, just as Ashley was saying there, a big part of what we mean by sharing on the lab is publishing, is sharing the collections that you've made. So, right now there's about 500 collections on the Learning Lab that other users have made. So those other users are, people like Ashley, educators here at the Smithsonian from our office, but from all the museums out there building collections, but also just teachers out there who are building, using these tools to build resources for their students, but also just sort of people out there who are using this for lots of things. Collections can be really structured and sequenced digital learning resources, but they can also just be a way for people to pull together things that are meaningful to them. And so we're seeing people use it in lots of different ways. But you certainly don't have to publish what you make on the lab. Collections can be created, they can be shared and used with students in a very sort of unlisted way, so not shared into the system. But if you do choose to publish your collection, it means, first that others can find it. And so others can search and they can find this collection. And once they've found it, Paula, to your question, yes, you can edit it. So once you've found a collection that you're interested in, you certainly could use it the way you found it, but we don't think that's probably the way that makes sense for most people. And so once you've found a collection you like, you can copy it. And once you've copied it, you really can do what you need to do with it to make it useful to you. So you can add to it and subtract to it. You can upload images or files from your computer to add into the collection. You can bring in URLs like Ashley did with the NPR story to make the collection more useful. You can rewrite those quiz questions. You can add new annotations, subtract annotations, really do what it takes to make it useful to you. And then you can publish your version if you want, or you can use it in the way that makes sense to you. We also think about sharing in the way that we share lots of things that we find online. So there's lots of ways to easily share anything that's discovered on the lab on all the popular social media platforms, to put content out into Google Classroom, other places like that. So there's lots of ways to easily get the content that you've found out to the people that you care about. And finally, sharing means assigning. So Ashley referenced this, that if she were in the classroom and using this with her students would have accounts on the lab. She would roster them together, and she could assign that Marian Anderson collection to them. And then on the back end, she can see who's in the roster, see where they are in terms of completing the assignments. And Peggy, I think to your point, some of the really interesting things I think we've been seeing teachers do is not just build a sequenced learning experience with quiz questions and things where the students kind of work through it and complete an assignment, but actually, use the tools of the lab to do internet research, to build their own collections, to use the tools in the way that I think we sort of envision primarily teachers would do it. And we're going to look at some examples here in just a minute. So we're in the process of launching. We're kind of formally launching the Learning Lab at the ISTE conference, which is in Denver, Colorado this year, coming up here in a couple of weeks. We'll have a big presence there. If any of you are going to be there, please come and find us. Ashley and I will be there all week, and we'll have a big space where we can demo this, and we've got stickers and card games and all kinds of cool things. There's some sessions going on, more formal kind of bring your own device sessions, but also just a lot of opportunity to think about how we might evolve this site. So even though we're really launching in June, the site will always continue to evolve, and it will evolve based on how you use it, how we observe you using it. So we've got some new things coming right away. The ability to embed content, so if you find a collection or build a collection or some resources that you want to put on your site, just like YouTube, where you can kind of grab some code and put that over on your classroom site or your blog or wherever you want to share it, that's coming. We've got some new learner responses. Those sort of it's sort of limited primarily to quizzes or student uploads right now. We're going to have some sorting and timelining tools, some group discussion opportunities that you could build into your collections. That makes sense for the way you want to use a collection. And lots of little things going on with the way that the site looks and feels, and a lot more information about how other users use your collections. The video tutorials that I mentioned there in 5 are up on the site. They just went up today under the Discover, Create, Share pages. I'll put some links to that here in just a second over in the chat so you can easily find those. So we've got 7 videos that kind of walk you through the overview of the site. So. So if you're definitely, as Ashley said, if you're going to be at ISTE, let us know, because we'd love to connect with you. The rest of our slides, I think the rest of our presentation, we have some examples of the way that some teachers that we've met have been using the lab. So I'm going to sort of turn things back over to Ashley.
Sure, thanks. And like I said, if you're going to be at the ISTE conference, we would love to meet you in person. It's always so exciting. I work with a lot of teachers from across the country, and so it's always so exciting to actually meet them in person and hear about what their students are doing. So we would love to meet you in person. So I'm just going to walk through, kind of for the ending of this webinar, some examples of how people are using the Learning Lab in their own classrooms. And there's a variety of examples, some that are very simple, some very complex, and some in between. So hopefully it's some inspiration and kind of a springboard for you to think about how you might use it with your own students or even with other teachers. So the first example is from a first grade classroom in Vermont. Actually, one of the Vermont Teachers of the Year this year does a lot of artwork with her students, and they create portraits. So for Mother's Day, Father's Day, they create portraits. And typically they're very similar to what you've probably seen, in a first grade classroom, where there's a smiley face and, some curly Q hair, and that's about it. And so in thinking about how to introduce portraits to her students, she just did a quick search. And what's nice about this is she actually didn't have to create a collection at all. She just looked through and found specific images, portraits of a variety of different people, and was able to show these as some inspiration for her students, so that when they were in the classroom, they could start to think about how they would include, not only self-portraits, but again, parents, things like that. And so one of the things that she did was print out some of those portraits for her students who like to have kind of that tactile connection to objects and resources, and think about kind of the inspiration that goes along with that. How are portraits, the sitters, how are they positioned in those portraits? Yes, the original selfies, so to speak. I like that. And being able to see kind of a wide range too of what portraits are, and think about kind of what they include typically. Do they always have to include the face? And it's kind of similar to what we did with that innovation collection, thinking about what elements exist in portraiture. So it was a much deeper kind of conversation around the types of artwork that they were making. And again, that's with a first grade classroom. Kind of going up to kind of one of the higher levels in high school, AP US History, I had created a collection of just a few specific resources from Harper's Weekly, and these were depictions of what it was like to be a woman during the Civil War era. And I was pleasantly surprised that someone on Twitter found it and actually used this as the basis for a larger research paper. So he went through all of the activities. You can see there it works on an iPad to be able to go through, and he didn't even set up an account. He just went ahead and wrote in his notebook too. So there's a lot of different ways to differentiate how you use the tool based on what you've got, because we obviously realize that not everybody has personal iPads or things like that. So being able to use it in a lot of different ways is really important to us. We also have a high school English example from Lincoln, Nebraska, where a teacher actually took the novel Catcher in the Rye and mapped out Holden's footsteps, so to speak. And so she paired a quote from the novel with an artwork that went along with that. And so you can kind of follow Holden's footsteps. But what I love about this is this was one example for her students, but then she actually asked students to start doing this with the novels that they read to check for understanding. So it's not really a book report as much as it is pairing the quotes within the text, citing those with artworks and photographs from the Smithsonian. So I thought that was a really kind of creative and innovative way to use the tool. Here in Glenshaw, Pennsylvania, a teacher, Tom Gray, he teaches middle school social studies, had a great idea for his students actually to be the creators. So because the resources, they're so vast, he kind of wanted to rein in his students' searches. So he gave them kind of a challenge to pretend that they were Andrew Jackson's campaign manager in the election of 1824. And so they were searching for portraits of Andrew Jackson, which there's about 200 of them, and then thinking about specific reasons and symbolism behind these portraits and why would they use this specific portrait in the classroom. And so here's just one example where the student was then able to overlay hot spots to say, hey, this is a loose vine and I would use this because that actually symbolizes kind of how the U.S. was being seen at that time. And so it was just very interesting that he gave kind of the reins over to his students. This is an example from a 5th grade classroom, kind of blending the social studies and English language arts, as well as English language learners too. So in Arkansas, we had a teacher who put together a really great resource on how to help students read the Gettysburg Address and really understand it too, addressing the text in kind of a non-threatening way, where she first starts out with which word appears most often and then moves into kind of deeper meanings. And so what I like about this one too is she gives some examples of how to adapt this specific collection for students who are learning English for the first time. It also includes a video of Colin Powell when he was here at the National Museum of American History reading aloud the Gettysburg Address. So it also adds kind of that contemporary link and allows students to listen as someone else is reading it aloud to start to kind of take note of which words in the text appear most often. So I thought that was a really innovative way to use the tool again. And then finally, there's museum educators like myself who are thinking about their own collections and own resources in new and exciting ways. And so this is an educator from the Postal Museum. Yes, there's a Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. And she took a series of stamps and put together some quiz questions to highlight kind of the idea of cloud classification. She paired it with an external resource and then was able to use those as kind of mini artworks to identify the different features and classifications of clouds. What's also really exciting is, Darren mentioned that there's 1.32 million resources, but that number is continually going up as we start to work with other museums here in Washington. We found that there's images and files that would be really great for teachers, and so we're starting to work together with the different museums to make sure that those are readily available online. And so just this past week, we actually added 120 new images from the forensic anthropology unit here at the Smithsonian. So these are readily available for students to start to think about what do bones actually tell us about history and start to walk them through. So it's a pretty neat tool to be able to share all of those different types of things, and this is just one example of how I used these new resources to showcase the different elements of bones. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our time, and I know Peggy has a few things that she wants to share as well. So I'll turn it over to Peggy.
I did capture lots of questions, some of which were answered. Is the Smithsonian getting into virtual reality? He's got lots of physical reality resources.
I think I can address a little bit of that. I'm
Okay.
not sure specifically what you mean on virtual reality. We are doing a lot now with figuring out how to digitize objects using 3D digitization technology. So
somebody did ask that.
Yeah, so really, most of our most of our collections, we're not the National Archives or the Library of Congress. Most of our things are things. They're three-dimensional objects, and digitizing something in 3 dimensions is a little bit more complicated and has some things. And so there's a whole process going on right now to figure out how to do that. And there's some really cool, I'll put the URL into the chat. There's some really cool models that in 3D that you can explore online, or you can actually download them. If you're using 3D printing, you can download these and make your own copies of them.
Wow, okay. You even showed an example of this. Someone asked, though, are these resources easily found by using a hashtag?
I'll jump in with this one.
Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, sure. So I'll be 100% honest. We have 1.3 million resources.
Sure.
To think about that is quite daunting, I'll say. But
Absolutely.
what we're doing is working with the different museums to help them create better metadata so that things are more discoverable and easily searchable. But right now what you do is basically, like I showed with the portrait example, the teacher just searched for portraits, looked at images, and was able to start to hone specifically what she was looking for. I know when she did a search, she knew that we had a George Washington portrait, so she included that. And she has an affinity for Elvis, and so she included that one as well. So starting to kind of refine your search to include just images or just videos, whatever you're looking for, or if you know that you want something from the American History Museum versus the American Art Museum, you can also refine in that way. A lot of what I think too, though, is the idea of kind of mind mapping with your search terms to be able to think about, so how would a curator include this information? And so, you might try moon gloves first, and then also might try spacesuit and come up with some different answers. So I think it's also kind of a lesson in internet research. But again, it's getting better and better, and I think what's nice too is as we continue to create collections, you're not only discovering the individual resources, but you're also discovering larger collections of these related resources that go together, and how people view, how these resources go together. One resource could be used in a variety of different ways. So.
Sure. Brendan, you've got a question, and it looks like you also have the mic, so either a question or a comment. You may go ahead. Yeah, click on the talk button. That's above participants.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. One of the aspects of the projects that I have many of my students use is to consult or interview an expert. So anybody at Smithsonian that they could effectively get hold of and that could have the time to help my students in that endeavor.
Sure, I'll answer that one. Sorry, I couldn't tell if Darren was going to chime in. So there are 6,000 employees at the Smithsonian, and they are in a variety of different disciplines, of course. Some of them are actually doing active research as well. And so some of the things that our office has done are things like Google Hangouts. I know Paula just actually did a session for another group on the idea of Google Hangouts and kind of those Skype mystery chat type things. And so at times we'll work with specific experts to allow them to connect with both teachers for kind of more of like that content development, but then also thinking about having students ask questions too. So there was a great one that we just did not too long ago on aerodynamics, and there was a classroom who was actually just studying paper airplanes. And so it was great for them to be able to share what they knew, but then also connect with the expert to be able to kind of get that back and forth with the expert of how do we make a better paper airplane and what things should we be considering, and really think about aerodynamics and aspect ratio and all of those different elements as they created paper airplanes in a 5th grade classroom. So there's a lot of opportunities for that kind of thing. So if you'd like, feel free to reach out to us. I think somewhere in one of these chats we included that our Twitter handle is Smithsonian Lab, L-A-B, but we'd love to, and often we update when we're having different chats like that and things like that. So, and I'm always happy to help pass on email questions and things like that to some of our experts as well.
I'm glad you brought up Twitter. Actually, Twitter is actually more and more a great way to connect with the individual museums and try to find an individual person that your students might be able to engage with. As Ashley said, a lot of the researchers and scientists and curators here aren't often here. They're often kind of out in the field, out doing research, and so it's not always possible to connect with the person that you're looking for. But often Twitter and other social media places where you'll find all the museums, all the research centers are a good way to sort of begin reaching out and trying to find the right person. And there's a lot of educators at the Smithsonian too who work every day with the scientists and the experts who are often often have a little bit more availability to interact with students out there that might be in the classroom.
Somebody asked about copyright. Is this considered Creative Commons, or is it some sort of copyright that you have to cite when you use something?
Sure, great question. Yeah, so we don't use the Creative Commons licenses here, but we do have a general terms of use at the Smithsonian that allows open use for educational purposes. There's some information, if you're at the Learning Lab site at the bottom, there's some information right to the terms of use there with some more specifics. But we certainly welcome educational use of all the material. The images on Learning Lab have a download button on the left, so you can grab the image that you want. And we're working on actually a citation button. I just saw Brendan's comment there. So coming soon there'll be a button there that'll generate a citation for you for any resource or collection to both to emphasize the importance of that, but also to make it a little bit easier for you or your students to cite where you found the resource.
Sure. And can these resources be used globally or just the U.S.?
Globally, yeah. Everything's free and available to anybody in the world.
Okay. Somebody asked, can these photos be used for free on websites?
They can. There's some there's a little bit of language there about citation in the terms of use. Right. We do ask that you cite the Smithsonian and provide a link back to the source. But yeah, as long as you're not using it in a commercial purpose, so you can use it to create lessons or other things. As long as you're not selling the things that you've made, you can use it in a way that makes sense for you.
Good. If a teacher creates an account, can he or she then add students to a class, or do students have to create accounts first?
I'll jump in with that answer. So how it works is really there's two different types of accounts. There's, of course, the 13 and over, which is teachers and some middle school students as well as high school and even lifelong learners. I will say it's quite addictive, so be careful. You could spend hours and hours and learn all sorts of new things, so which is probably not the worst thing that could happen. But so there's two different types of accounts, like I mentioned, and there's also one for students 12 and under. The main difference for creating that distinction is that students 12 and under can participate. They can use searches, they can favorite their own resources, they can even create collections, but there's a limitation to what they're able to share publicly. And so each individual, whether a student or a teacher, will have to create a free account. And for those of you, I know probably some of you have actually been creating accounts while we've been talking. It takes less than 30 seconds. It includes just some simple information, including your name, and you can even link it to Facebook or Google Plus so that it's kind of a single sign-on. And then from there we ask for a birthday and an email address. And then that way you can also create rosters of all of your students and the users themselves. So yeah, so to answer your question, each individual does need their own user account.
Okay, and that includes any individual? It doesn't have to be a student or a teacher. Somebody asked about senior citizens.
Absolutely, absolutely. At the museums, one of the things that we love is the idea of lifelong learning. So I myself find that now that I'm not in the classroom, I'm still, continuously exploring all sorts of new different aspects.
Sure.
And what's nice about the Smithsonian is it offers dimensions in history, art, culture, the sciences, and also some opportunities for some interdisciplinary learning as well. So.
Sure. Are the embed codes provided for the video resources in the Smithsonian Learning Lab?
They will be. So the embed features are coming soon. They should be available in a couple weeks. Now, all the videos that are on Learning Lab right now are also on YouTube. So if you find something on Learning Lab today, when you get lost down that rabbit hole and are exploring things, you can jump over to YouTube and grab the embed code there if you want to get it out there, if you have the need to embed it somewhere. But in a couple of weeks, the embed codes will be up on the Learning Lab site itself.
Okay. Somebody asked for a link for that first grade portrait collection. Is there such a thing?
There is not, and actually what I love about what that teacher did was she actually just used the search results. So she didn't pull anything together necessarily. She was just kind of using it as a first step. And in order to search, you actually don't even need a user account. Once you start doing things like creating collections or even kind of hearting your different favorite resources, that's when you'll need a user account. So it was just a very simple way to kind of give some inspiration to her students. So unfortunately, there's not a link, but it's something that's a good first step into using the tool.
Sure. Is there a collection of audio files, especially interviews with historical people? And I think this came up when you mentioned the Oliver North Gettysburg Address recitation.
Yes, there was a Colin Powell video when he visited. Yes, when he visited
another general. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
General.
So under when you're refining your search, you can limit it to just video and audio recordings, and a lot of those video and audio recordings are things like that recitation or video interviews with experts. We just did a series with experts thinking about how do they use observation skills in their work, but we looked at it from a variety of different perspectives. So not just historians, not just scientists, not just art historians. And so thinking kind of across the disciplines to be able to capture all of those different ideas. So yes,
sure.
So they are, you're just able to refine the search.
Right. Is there a global network of similar museums in other countries?
I'm not sure specifically maybe what that question was looking for. There are other online digital resource places that are more about more on the discovery end in our sort of discovery, create, share thing. There's a place called a site called Europeana, which pulls together resources from European museums and other cultural heritage institutions. They're mostly about search, though. They're really about providing one point of access to that. It's not a learning space. It's not an education space that's necessarily designed. But most museums, most large museums, and even now smaller museums are in the process of digitizing their collections and really thinking about how access is really important to their missions, and so they want to, even smaller museums that tend to focus more on a regional or local audience are sort of getting in the game of trying to have more of a global perspective.
Sure. Is there a school loan service or mobile traveling exhibitions or an outreach program?
Actually, I'll jump in on that too. The Smithsonian does have a traveling exhibition service. It's called the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service. And they travel all kinds of exhibitions all around the country. Dozens of different exhibitions are out there right now traveling about, and they have a website that you can see the schedule and see if there's something that's close by to you. We also have a network of affiliate museums, several hundred affiliate museums in I think 46 states that are affiliated with the Smithsonian and borrow a lot of collections and make them available at those sort of regional outposts.
Great. Those were the questions I was able to capture. Does anyone else have anything to ask Ashley or Darren? I see some typing. Oh, I did miss that one. Are there any plans to integrate with Google Classroom?
Yes, and others. Right now in the little share menu, if you find a resource or a collection, you can share things directly into Google Classroom, but it's really just kind of the first step. We're working on integrating with their rosters, and then an even further integration where the collections could be used right within a Google Classroom environment for account sign up and for other activities. So, you know, a big next step for us in the next year, sort of after we launch here at ISTE, is to think about how our system can connect with a LMS system you might be using in your district or your classroom, so that you know, you and your students don't need yet another login, yet another account, so that all of that can be a little bit more seamless.
Sure. Well, that's great. Okay, I think we'll wrap up questions there and move on to our upcoming shows. But I'm going to turn the mic over to Paula, who's going to talk about the panel presentation next Saturday on the 18th.
Actually, I'm going to talk first, and then Paula is going to tell you something awesome. Next week is the last week of our weekly webinars before the summer break. So we are really hoping that all of you will come back and join us for this open mic show. And Paula has some great plans for this session, and I'm going to let her tell you about that. And I'm just going to say, then come back after the break on August 6th and join us for the start of the new school year. So Paula, take it away.
All right, Peggy, thank you so much. Yes, we are wrapping up another year here at Classroom 2.0 Live with our last session until August. So please mark this on your calendar and join us for open mic sharing of what's on our summer bucket list. We have put together a Google Doc where we're asking you to go ahead and sign up ahead of time to answer one of the questions that will be posed. I'm going to run it sort of like a live Twitter chat where a question is posed and then people will raise their hand to answer the question. And as a way of encouraging participation for next week, we're going to start sending this out through social media so that we can get people to sign up. And hopefully also those of you that come to our show on a regular basis will not be afraid to raise your hand and take the microphone. It makes it much more fun to do that. I mean, typing in the chat is wonderful, but sometimes just taking the mic and letting us hear your voice is thrilling too. I know I love hearing Peggy's enthusiasm and all of our guest speakers and presenters. I feel like sometimes, you know, I'm just sitting in the room with them. Even though I can't see them, I still feel so much better connected to them. So we are so thrilled that we are also going to be having a prize giveaway for anyone who will take the mic next week. So mark it on your calendars and we will see you there.
The Learning Revolution project is Steve Hargadon's latest. He's gathered all his resources in one place, including host your own webinar. If you do host your own webinar, you get access to a Blackboard Collaborate classroom like this one is, and as long as your session is public, it's free. You can nominate a featured teacher from either this website or within the Resources tab in the Live Binder for the month. And you can also take the survey from within that Resources tab, or the link from the chat box, or the direct URL link here. When you log out of the session, the survey should open up in your browser. Also, inside that survey, you can request a professional development certificate. It will now print out with your name. And make sure you type in a personal email address to receive this. Otherwise, you may not get it. Schools tend to block this from getting to you. Again, special thanks to our special guests, Ashley and Darren, to Steve Hargadon, founder of Classroom 2.0, Teacher 2.0, Future of Education, and the Learning Revolution, to Blackboard Collaborate for our webinar platform, and to everyone who participated in the show today. Thanks so much for coming.